Teddy, darling, would you like to help introduce today's guest and the program, Teddy? Oh, good. Come closer to me. That's right. Okay, good boy. Now, do you remember how this goes? That's right. Okay, so we say hello and welcome to Talk. Yes, with me, Anna. And can you tell everybody your name, please? Tell everybody your name. That's right, Teddy. Okay. And do you remember our guest's name? Do you remember our guest's name? I think we've got a little bit distracted. Shall we go back to introducing our guest? That's right. Okay. So our guest's name is, that's right, it's Belinda Johnston. Hello, Belinda.
Hello. Hi. Please do call me Ben, which is my
yes,
shortened version.
We weren't sure whether that would have been too informal, you see.
No, not at all. It makes me feel much more relaxed. Belinda is quite formal for me, but I've been called it that all my life, so very happy with it.
Well, Teddy is a very polite dog and doesn't quite know exactly, what's appropriate, formal or informal. So thank you for correcting us. Mm-hmm. And thank you very much, Teddy. Is there anything else you'd like to say? You're hot. Yes, I know you're hot. It's a very hot day today still. Okay. Well, Ben, welcome. And, thank you so much for being here today, because you have a very special charity, ourspecialfriends.org, in fact. So I think one of the things that I thought would be good is to start with what's right at the front of your website. There is this amazing statement: promoting, preserving, and providing the power of animal companionship, which is such an impactful statement. Would you like to explain what you mean by that?
Well, that is huge thanks to a lovely, sadly now late contemporary of mine, a vet who volunteered for us for a short time. We found it very difficult to explain what we do, because a charity called Our Special Friends doesn't say what it does on the tin at all, but it works very well for people who we are supporting. And he was very keen that we had something that really does show the breadth of what we do. So the promoting side of it is letting people really know how important animal friends are to people. And when I talk about the power of animal companionship, people automatically think about assistance dogs or animals in therapeutic settings or professional working roles. And we're all about the 13 million dogs, 12 million cats, hundreds of thousands of horses, and also the 3 million small furries that live in over 50% of UK households. So we're talking about the power of the companionship of pets in our lives. The promoting preserving is about trying to keep these really important, life-enhancing, life-saving relationships together for as long as possible, if that is appropriate. Because what we're finding in this work in West Suffolk with a charity that we've developed over a decade is that there are many, many different situations where perhaps the kindest thing would be to part, and to part in an amicable way. So the promoting preserving is preserving where at all possible, and that is with a range of support services and helping to make our local community pet inclusive, making sure that there is affordable, accessible support for people in difficult times. And then the promoting, preserving, providing is because by helping people at times of crisis and difficulty, we can keep their relationships going, but also, just to confuse things, one of the interventions we do is that we have volunteers with their own friendly dogs popping in to see people in their own homes on a weekly basis, usually, and staying with them so that that person who's living on their own, usually, or perhaps caring for someone else or being cared for, they get to see an animal friend, and they also get the volunteer owner alongside as well. And there are some lovely ripple effects and impacts from that provision of a friendly person with a friendly dog popping in. It's not, we haven't got a laser focused branding message. So that is the attempt with the 3 Ps to encapsulate the aspects of what we're doing.
That is quite an expansive service that you're providing. There's just so much there. So I guess my next question is, what prompted you to start this?
Well, I'm trained as a vet, and I have always been really quite a human-centric vet, someone who's as interested about the human side of the equation. And what happened for me was that I had a practice in London, and then moved when marriage took me to Suffolk. And what happened was that I was aware of how animals help people to cope, but that having to say goodbye to an animal friend, whether it's from euthanasia or relinquishment, is really difficult sometimes. And I had trained as a cruise human bereavement counsellor, sort of a human bereavement volunteer. I had also been a Samaritan, and I had also done some person-centered counselling skills. And I had fallen into the niche of teaching the veterinary profession and the animal welfare sector on the grieving journey and the importance of supporting people before, during, and after these moments of saying goodbye. So I was very aware that there were people who were grieving who weren't necessarily at the vets and who weren't at the rehoming centres. So what happened is I started looking for people in the community. So that was 14 odd years ago. And I literally started in our local village where I knew that someone was having a difficult time and she had pets in her life. And it just came from there and I had no idea. I really had no idea what we would find. What we found is a massive welfare gap. And yes, this innovative community outreach model in West Suffolk is providing a range of support. It's any age of person, any vulnerability, and any species, but it's predominantly dogs and cats. But that is because that is what people have needed. And I say, when people say, oh, you're doing far too much, I say, well, when you go to the doctor, they don't say, sorry, we're not looking after 37-year-olds today. And if you go to a vet, they don't say, we don't treat Dalmatians. The challenge we've got is that this is an innovative way of approaching pet-related issues. And we're trying to fill a gap, which we feel very strongly exists in the community, where people aren't getting the care and support that they need.
It's a myriad of reasons why people would be in situations where they have to be separated from their pets. And obviously the one that everybody thinks of is when an elderly person is going into a care home. But it seems that there are lots of other reasons why this might happen. Would you tell us about some of the other reasons why people might be having to be parted from their pets?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I quickly learned was fostering to reunite was an important intervention, because what used to happen is and these were historical cases that I heard about, where people had been in hospital and for prolonged periods of time and come out and found that the very relationship, the human family, the family, non-human family that was there before they went into hospital was no longer there, because people were trying to look after their pets and they had ended up having to rehome. So fostering to reunite is needed when people go into hospital, be it for physical illness or mental ill health, when people are fleeing domestic abuse, because people fleeing domestic abuse, often the barrier is that they can't take their animal with them. And one very memorable case I had was a mum ringing me in the early days and saying, I'm picking up my daughter this afternoon from school and I'm fleeing. What can you do to help me with my dog and my 2 cats? And I said, well, you know, what is the dog? And the most important thing with all these situations is to make sure we know enough about the animal so that the animal's care needs can be met. So we encourage all our owners, anyone who owns an animal, to have a pet CV so that other people know what you feed, what their likes, what their dislikes are, so they can be treated in a consistent way. And this happened to be a collie. And this is all about local knowledge, having an understanding of what resources are available. And I knew of somebody who was a shepherd. I knew that he had adopted a collie from our organization, via our organization, because an elderly couple had waited months for a gorgeous collie to come over from Ireland, only to find out that it was an escapologist. And after 6 months of total caregiver burden, they were completely burnt out. And luckily, someone knew of us. So I managed to help them, and their gorgeous collie went off with the shepherd and has never looked back. So I was able to quickly ring this person and say, there's an emergency. Could you take a collie? By wonderful chance, he said yes. So this lady was able to pick up her collie and take her collie and pick up her daughter and drop the dog before going to the refuge. Well, actually, no, it wasn't a refuge. It was a safe house. A week later, she turned around and said, well, what about the cats? And I said, what do you mean about the cats? Because I had explained on that Friday that actually we didn't have the capacity to do the cats. Sorry, cats would have to stay. I said, I told you I couldn't do anything about the cats for you at that point. And I said, where are the cats? And she said, in my car. So we want to try and find solutions. And it's not rocket science, it's about finding solutions. And we did manage to find her a cattery that had capacity for her to drop her cats off. It's very important that animals' vaccinations are up to date, because then there is greater capacity for boarding options if necessary. And the joyous result of this story was that 2 weeks later after this, they were all reunited just before Christmas. So we'd helped someone to flee, we'd kept her animal safe. And that to me is an intervention that's really worthwhile. So fostering to reunite is looking after a pet, cat or dog, usually for somebody who is unable to at that time, with the sole purpose of reuniting them when the crisis is over.
It is crucial because really we're talking also about the safety of the animal. Because whether we're looking at the animal losing its main carer because they're in hospital, or they're left in a domestic abuse situation, and we know that where there is domestic abuse, animals are often abused themselves. So a vital service that you're providing, and I'm just in awe of what you're doing. It's wonderful. Now you're located in South Suffolk, I think you said?
It's West Suffolk.
West Suffolk. Are there any other charities doing this in other parts of the country?
The wonderful thing about the large voluntary community, faith and social enterprise sector is that there are masses and masses of resources. We managed to encourage the Dogs Trust and Cats Protection, who have fostering to reunite for domestic abuse cases, to come into our area, because I was aware that they were providing it in other parts of the country. There are other organizations like, say, the Cinnamon Trust, who do dog walking nationally. What we're finding is that there are others that do focus on particular interventions, and we can work alongside these organizations to help provide more support. What we're doing, which is subtly different, is I have created a new professional role, and that we have called an Animal Companionship Practitioner. And it's somebody who's got veterinary, at the moment, it's someone who's got veterinary knowledge, because I have replicated it in two colleagues, both who are wonderful veterinary nurses. One, Gemma, has been with me for 5 years, and Sam has been with us for 1 year. And what it is that if you have got some veterinary knowledge and you can then learn more about the human-centric side of things, it is a wonderful way of safeguarding animals where they are actually experiencing their owner's vulnerability. It's not easy to explain, but the Animal Companionship Practitioner role means that we can prescribe our knowledge that we've gained, which is not geographically restricted, but we can also, in our local area, we've got over 100 volunteers in our local area who are able to provide a range of support. We can also match local volunteers to local interventions. So someone might particularly love dog walking, having lost their own dog or having had experience of a dog, or not able to have a dog in their own home because of no pet policies. And we could match them to somebody who's got mobility issues and is unable to walk their dog. I'm telling you about this role because that is the innovative bit. Because when a referral comes in from family, friends, social workers, mental health practitioners, dementia intensive support team, anyone who comes across an animal where the owner might be having difficulty can refer in. When they refer in, the most important thing is a complete holistic assessment of what is involved, what is the current network of support, because so often people can't ask for help for themselves, but there is someone there who could perhaps help. And what I'm wanting to do with West Suffolk, I know now exactly what I want to do. I want to make West Suffolk as pet inclusive as possible. I want any accommodation, temporary and emergency, social housing, to have some pet inclusive capacity, so that when people do have to have inpatient support, maybe, just maybe, their indoor only cat could go with them, and maybe their indoor outdoor cat could go with them, because when those animals come into foster, they have to be indoor only because it's not safe for them to be outdoors. I also want to introduce the concept that leaving pets in situ in their own homes with people popping in is sometimes the best solution, because they are in their safe environment, and you could have people popping in and providing enrichment as well as checking on the water, the food, and everything else. I can talk a lot about this, but what I do know is this works. But the reason why we're no greater than West Suffolk is because in every town, in every village, in every community, there are hidden people with hidden pets that are not getting the care and support that they need.
Indeed. And I think I just love the fact that you're looking at supporting people who are struggling for whatever reason with their pets. And we were talking about separation happening on account of the person having to leave, whether it's temporarily or permanently. But of course, then there is the actual number of people who have to give up their beloved pet because they can't look after them in the way that they need to. So to have that support come in is crucial. And I think I would guess that for as many people who are needing that permanently because of disability, etc., there are going to be others for whom this is a temporary respite.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So there's a lot of people there's the ADCH, the Association of Dogs and Cats Home. There are an awful lot of centres and that are realising that it makes complete sense to try and prevent relinquishment where at all possible. And often by enhancing an already support network, or by introducing, empowering, and creating a new support network, you can actually prevent someone having to relinquish. You can also prevent people from relinquishing by advocating informally to housing associations to say, look, I appreciate you've got a no pet policy. I really do. But why don't you give them a trial? And, we did that for a gentleman who had been in the accommodation for a year and was completely going to go on the streets himself because he wasn't allowed to have the dog that he had relatively recently, acquired. And we just said, look, we can, by you saying he has to get rid of this dog, I can tell you there is nowhere for this dog to go. Because actually there was nowhere safe for this dog to go because the rehoming sector is in a crisis itself. And in fairness, they were fantastic at being open-minded, and they gave him a trial, and he absolutely excelled, and they were able to stay together. For me, it's about working out where there's where there are situations that perhaps with a change in policy or a change in thinking, that we could increase the capacity in the system to enable people to stay together if it's at all possible. And if it's not, to reassure them, to enable those pets to be somewhere safe for the future. And so the person can feel that it was the right decision to part. And that, for me, does really help long-term emotional well-being. And there are some care homes that are accepting animals, but obviously it has to be appropriate for the animal as well.
Yes, indeed. That is so important. I was just thinking about the trouble that you are taking to keep these bonds intact. And I think it would be good to talk about why that's important for people and why it's important for animals, because there's a lot of people out there for whom this is a complete mystery.
Mm.
Would you work so hard to keep people and animals together? For me, it's obvious. For many of us, it's obvious. But I think it would be good to expand a little bit on how having an animal in our lives enhances mental health, mental well-being for the person and for the animal.
And it does if it's mutually beneficial and well supported. So the American Veterinary Medical Association has defined the human-animal bond as needing to be mutually beneficial. And then there are fantastic evidence-based outcomes, benefits on your health, your well-being. There is so much peer-reviewed research and evidence. I think I would like to bring in the fact that what we're finding is that very often these relationships are suboptimal for all sorts of reasons. But they can be enhanced. And from a veterinary perspective, I swore that I would look after animal welfare. And I'm partly horrified that we're just scratching the surface by just expecting everybody to come to the clinic. Because there are so many animals that don't get anywhere near a vet. For me, it's about the fact that if they are appropriate and mutually beneficial in any way, then it's a supportive relationship for people who possibly don't have any other people in their lives. They could be the only other heartbeat in their home. But personally, for me, like all these situations, this has been a personal journey. And I completely took for granted a relationship that I had with my first individual dog, because we had lots of animals as children, which I was very, very fortunate to have nature and animals in my life as a child. And when I went to vet school, rather irresponsibly, in my second year of university at vet school, I got a puppy, which people don't recommend at all, and certainly wouldn't really be allowed now, as far as I can see. But I answered an ad, mongrel pup wanting good home, and went off and got mongrel pup. And I was living in independent accommodation, which happened to be, this house was owned by a friend of mine. She didn't mind at all when I turned up with a puppy. And I managed to keep her in my life until the birth of my first daughter, who's now 30 years old. So I had her all that time, but I'd never lost her. And so when I went to the States to see practice, somebody else looked after her. My sister used to take her on hiking holidays. People would support her. I was able to create a network of support, and I was very, very lucky. Now, I was particularly lucky because my mother had died when I was 10, and I coped because of all the animals and family and friends that we had around. But then what happened to me is that my father took his life when I was at university. So in my penultimate year of university, I lost my father to suicide. But I graduated a year later. I got my job in London with my dog in tow. And I was so lucky to have been working in the veterinary profession. I was so lucky to have been able to have a network of support, because Tasha came with me too. She was a collie cross retriever. It wasn't a gushy relationship at all. But what it meant is I was very connected to the communities everywhere I went. I walk regularly. I would meet people in the community. I completely underestimated how important that relationship was. And it's only now that I really get how it's a matter of luck as to whether you fall below a threshold of coping. Our charity is person-centered. We are non-judgmental and unconditional. Anyone can fall below a threshold of coping. Anyone can have a situation where their capacity to care is compromised. I have just been very lucky that my coping mechanism wasn't alcohol. It might have been. Also that my innate resilience has kept up with the challenges. And so I see the human-animal bond as a really, really vital community public health asset that we're overlooking to our detriment. And I think we need to cherish how important these relationships are and nurture them as best as we can. Because personally, I've experienced how we can take them for granted.
In my work as a therapist, I come across countless examples of people their marriages have ended, or they've lost someone. They are held together by a thread, and the thread is the animal in their lives.
Absolutely.
We talk about suboptimal relationships, but then we have suboptimal relationships within our human relationships. So, couples that are not getting on, parents and children, under stress, the stresses of life actually impinging on the family. So,
Mm.
in the same way that we would want to give support to the human relationships, we
Yeah.
also need to give support to the animal human side of the equation, because those animals are part of the family. For those who are regular viewers of this channel, you will have come across interviews where you discover that our microbiomes are linked. That is the level of intimacy that exists between our animals and us. And I think for this reason, what you are doing is absolutely heroic in my mind.
Oh,
It's
thank you.
and that's why I was so happy to be able to have you on today. And I really hope that as this is watched, that people will think of perhaps somebody who is in need of help, or perhaps be able to volunteer their own help and support too. Because this is, you use the word community, and I think we can't talk about a human community that excludes animals,
Mm.
because we are so interconnected.
Mm.
Many people like to think that there's a separation, but the fact is that our humanity is enhanced by their presence in our lives, and they teach us so much. So it's vital that we have that sense of community extended. And I love that you're so much an advocate for inclusiveness. We happen to be in the southwest of the country, and animals seem to be, or dogs seem to be, everywhere, water bowls for them. And this is not something that I found in Surrey, in town Surrey, less so. Obviously, definitely not London. More of the country towns in Surrey a bit more open, but certainly in the southwest, that is the case. And this is what makes it easy
Mm.
for people
Mm.
to be able to have animals in their lives. And the more we cultivate that, the better for us and the better for our world. So thank you very much, Ben.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, I think the thing is that it's not for everyone. Not everybody has to love an animal, but it's respecting the specialness of the relationship. And for some people, it's music. For some people, it's sport. It's a love. It's a love of something. And the one welfare concept, which Rebecca Philanos said in 2016, human well-being, animal welfare, and the environment being intrinsically linked. What we're finding is that very often a carer will be going in to see somebody. The water bowl is not being filled up, so the animal's needs, emotional and practical needs, are not being dealt with, but also the outside environment is fecally laden. And, if we could just look at the whole concept of one welfare in a caring way, how lovely for somebody who is housebound but may be able to get out into a garden, to go out into a garden that actually is hygienic and better than very many of the ones that we see. I do appreciate that for a lot of people it doesn't make sense. And the challenge for us financially is that people who perhaps are financially more secure can also take their relationships for granted because they possibly own their own houses, and so there's no threat of eviction and being separated. I'm finding it very difficult seeing the distress of people who have no control on whether they are able to keep their animals or not. And I think this is something that a lot of people just don't realize, is that you may be forced to give up, and the very relationship that everybody else is taking for granted. So for me, the Renters Reform Bill was very good for private landlords, but it doesn't touch social housing and it doesn't touch temporary and emergency. And a lot of people are living on the streets with their pets simply because they have chosen to keep them rather than lose them by going somewhere that they can't take them. And then the other thing, that one person refused the accommodation that was offered because he had an elderly dog that needed some green space to pee, and it wasn't appropriate for the dog. And because he refused that, he said, this is not appropriate for my dog, that negated his housing application.
This is a huge can of worms,
Mm, mm.
well beyond the remit of this channel.
Yes, absolutely.
However, you have touched on something that is absolutely true, that all of this regulation is targeted at private landlords when we know that the worst offenders are definitely social housing,
Mm.
and that they are responsible for the most vulnerable members of our society and the animals therein. So this is a massive issue.
I watched a perpetrator, I watched a victim, a mother with two children and two dogs who were safe in a house. I watched her go back to a perpetrator because of a no pet policy. She wasn't allowed to keep the dogs there.
Yeah.
And I think that's not, I've had to live with that, but it was completely out of my control. It is a massive topic, but what I love is that, as you say, we absolutely get it. We have somehow got to find a way of funding this type of work, because the Care Act states that when someone goes into hospital, it's up to the statutory services to protect the property, and that includes the pets. But who pays for that? And when you foster to reunite, you can't expect someone to buy back their animal and pay for the costs of fostering. So what we're finding is that sustainable funding for this type of work is not easy. A, because it's innovative, so people don't necessarily understand it, but also the beneficiaries are people who are going through a very tough time. And some people have really, they are doing their best. So for me, what's really lovely now is being able to have these opportunities, and I really welcome this conversation. But equally, we've got to find people out of our community who might be able to help support us in what is a very, very difficult funding climate.
Indeed. And so this is why it's important to have conversations like this, because it's important that we're able to connect the dots. Your respect, but we need more people, because the more people, the more dots, and the more connected we become. And this is a very important piece of our animal and human welfare, but also our social welfare. So I thank you, and I thank you for your time today.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. I can obviously talk for Britain, which is great, but it is lovely being able to have a voice. And today and tomorrow is the Purina conference. And it's really lovely to hear people really are talking about this subject now, talking about the need for preventative and early intervention. And the only way we can do prevention and early intervention is by going out to the community, to people who can't come to us.
Yes, I actually, before I end, there was a question that came to mind a few minutes ago, and then it just went, but it's back. Are you aware of any work being done to train social workers or social welfare workers to spot whether there is any concern around animals? Only some time ago now, I read that if we could spot where there is stress around the animals, that's often a very strong indicator of problems elsewhere.
Absolutely. So there's a lot of work in this field. I'll talk a bit quicker. So veterinary social care is in the States, and it's actually coming over to the UK now. Our trustee, Rebecca Stevens, has just helped Bristol Vet School have, they've just employed their first veterinary human support worker. So that's one aspect of it. We are finding, I actually emailed today the head of adult social care in Suffolk to ask him whether he might consider having an animal companionship champion. There is now recognition of the fact that in the assessments that social workers do, they need to be very aware of the animals in the equation. We currently don't have safeguarding reporting for animals or care needs assessments for animals, but that's something that we will want to do. And just at a conference recently, the Wood Green Animal Shelter did a presentation on hidden lives, and they had done a survey via community professionals and had found out that there were 7.4 million animals that community professionals were concerned about. Now, I think there are many more animals that we would all be concerned about because we are finding people who don't have any support at all. So it is happening. It's just whether it's happening quick enough. And for the medical people, the health economic people on board with this, one economic survey suggested that animal companionship, dogs and cats, save the NHS 2.45 billion a year, just simply because people go to the doctors less. I'm overexcited about the fact that there is movement, but I'm just concerned, are we going to have a paradigm shift change quickly enough?
Well, we would like a paradigm shift quickly enough on many fronts. I think we have to be patient and understand that this is a work in process, and it's wonderful that you are playing such an important part in that. Now, if people want to find your organization and find out more or participate in some way, how do they do that?
Well, we have our website, which is ourspecialfriends.org. We have a telephone number that goes to a call center to help us make sure that it's answered, and they then email us, which is 01284 247 077. And on our website, there's a Get Help tab and there's a Give Help tab. But, we welcome any inquiries. I'm very, very keen. Our Special Friends does not want to, and this sounds a bit strange, we don't want to have lots of Our Special Friends. What we want animal-centric colleagues in the human-centric world and human-centric colleagues in the animal-centric world. But that needs education, it needs new roles, and it needs a lot of further work. But it's happening in West Suffolk, and we welcome any interest and any queries and any offers of support. But volunteers need to be in our area because it's local people helping local people.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'll be putting a link to that in the description box. Thank you again for your time today.
Thank you so much. Take care.
And thank you all for watching. Until next time, goodbye.